I want to talk about the non-technical aspects of scalability. Whenever you read a book about scaling, you're going to talk about horizontal, you're going to talk about vertical scaling, adding resources, instances, you increase RAM, all the stuff that we know about scalability. But on the other side of the coin of that is that you have to have some kind of team to maintain that scale, right? We talk about in this channel, you don't get anything for free. And just because you happen to scale doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see the benefits of scaling. And that's just the reality of software development. That's what we have to navigate around. Because let's face it, if I'm me and I have now gone from one thing to now six things, my capacity to maintain all of those is diminished. And now I'm being stretched from only handling one thing to now my attention is going to be stretched a little bit thinner across this wider spectrum of stuff. And so scaling needs to also scale with the team. So if you scale up your resources and your services and your whatever it is, you also have to scale the team appropriately to compensate for the additional technical footprint that you have out there now. And this is so important because scaling is difficult because it presents a very the cognitive load associated with scaling is massive, right? Because whenever you go from one instance to two, it changes everything, right? It changes everything about how your services communicate. You have to then think about, am I going to have competing consumers anywhere? Are my instances trying to access the same resource on a database at the same time? Changes everything. There's entire books, textbooks, classes devoted to this topic, right? Distributed systems. So whenever you just talk about scaling, you can't just throw it out flippantly, right? You have to understand the technical complexities that come along with it, but you have to have people on your team that know about it and also know to look for those things upon code review, because that's where it counts. And so if you have a team, you don't have a team that's experienced in distributed computing or scaling, horizontally, then you're going to suffer in the long run because although you've scaled the technical, you haven't scaled the people. You haven't scaled on a personal level, and that's not where you want to be, because where you're presenting yourself, you're going to be put in a spot where you've now created a bottleneck, not technically, but on the personal level. And whenever you have a personal bottleneck, that's a disaster, because now you've funneled all the knowledge into one person. But like anywhere else, if that person leaves, the knowledge is lost. And there's books devoted to that singular problem as well, because it's such a large problem that's not obviously unique to software development, but just because that's what I work in, it's a huge problem in this industry, because people figure out problems, but then don't document it and then leave. And then all of that knowledge is lost. And then somebody later on has to go and resolve all the same problems and then try to document it, but maybe they solved it in a different way. And it's a whole mess. And it's a really very, very large problem, because now in the job market we're seeing a lot less newer developers come into this industry. And obviously we're always combating against turnover rates being very high for this career. But now with the influx of AI into this whole thing, I just don't know what that's going to do for scalability on the non-technical level, because now if we're saying that we can introduce an agentic tool like Copilot into our development practice, we can do that, but it still does not replace adding people, right? We have to scale according to what the system demands. And we can't pretend like that's not a thing, right? Because one person can't know everything. But that's why teams are so critical, and that's why specialization is of utmost importance. You have to have the key people that know or are an expert in one particular area. You have to get those people to come together, and that's how you make something great. And it's so difficult to do, and it's extraordinarily difficult to get people to come together and scale with the system. But it's very important, right? Because it takes a while. It can take anywhere from six months to about a year and a half to truly understand a system at its whole. And it's only at that foundational understanding that you're going to be able to contribute at a very high level. And given the amount of time it takes to contribute at a high level, it makes sense to get people to grow with the system. But doing that is unbelievably difficult to do. And it's a big problem because people, again, the turnover rate in this industry on average, I think, is about 2 years. And so let's say, at best, you have about a year where you're performing at a somewhat high level. That's still not a lot of time, right? Large features and large, development efforts take years and years to do. So at best, somebody's just going to get started and then leave. And that just plummets scalability back down to zero. And then you have to get somebody else and then ramp them back up, and that's going to take a year and a half. And then scalability just ebbs and flows, and you never get that. You never reap the benefits, right? It can be very frustrating, and it's frustrating, I think, too, when we just don't talk about it, right? There's so many books dedicated to technical scaling, but I think there needs to be equal discussion around the non-technical aspects of scaling, because it's so critical, it's so important. I think that we've largely been failed by a lot of these training websites and tutorial-based sites and stuff like that because they've just been too commercialized, and they're too extracted away from reality. We've all heard about getting stuck in the never-ending tutorial loop. And that's very true. People get stuck in tutorial loops all the time and never break out of that, and they just never are able to advance because they're still on the foundational fundamentals in the tutorials. And my thought about that is that you're never going to be able to memorize 100% of the syntax of any language. It's just not going to happen. Me being a native English speaker, I don't know all the grammatical rules of that go into English, right? That's crazy. I'm no way at that level, but yet I speak English natively. And the same goes for C#. No, of course I don't know all the weird syntax that goes into C# and all the nuanced things associated with the language. But I can write C# at a high level, but that doesn't mean I know everything about it. But I can't then try to go and just remain as tutorials to get the last 20 to 10% of the missing syntax that I don't know, because there's not a lot of incentive for me to do that, because it's not going to directly impact how I write C# or design a system or anything like that. But what is going to impact that is having the right people around to be able to create something like that at a high level. And so scalability, from the non-technical perspective, takes a team, but it takes a team with the right focus in mind. And scaling means that you are a trustworthy developer. You can think creatively. You aren't limited to just copy and pasting off of an article that you read to solve the problem, but you're able to experiment and research and prototype, and then go and do that again for another implementation strategy that you want to try out. It's very important that creativity is the highest, is the top thing that you got to strive for, because let's face it, we're in a very creative field, and I don't like when people strip the creativity out of it, because that not only makes the job very dull, and it basically just reduces it down to just doing the same stuff over and over again. But creative problem solving is so important, and I think that that's what gets people excited and motivated to get into this career. But if you have someone teaching you who's not creative, who doesn't think that way, is not doesn't take a creative approach to problem solving, it can drain you, man. It can drain your enthusiasm for this career real quick. And honestly, it's a shame to see, because I think that there's a lot of exciting aspects about this career, but you just got to go and find them. And they're there to be found, but it takes a bit of digging, honestly. And I've been doing this for, coming up on about 7 years now. And what I've realized is that it takes intentional effort. You have to be intentional about making this career positive. You have to be intentional about making it good for you. But if you're passive and you don't take steps to make it better, you're probably going to get burnt out. And that's what happened to me. And I've learned from that. And now I've tried to correct that and try to make this career better for myself. And one way to do that is just to try to push for creative problem solving. And that's so important because you don't know, there's so many ways that things can be solved, but that's how things like come about. Like if you have a topic or if you have a special interest that you want to pursue, I mean, that's how papers are written, right? Is because you research and you come away with like raw data about whatever it is that you're researching. So I think that there's so much to learn, and I think that there's so much value that you can still get out of this career. But you have to push for it, if that makes sense. That directly ties back to scalability, because if you are on a team with people who are thinking and operating like that, then you're probably going to scale with your system. But if you're working with people who are not thinking that way, regardless of how much you scale your system, if you can't scale the people with it, you're gonna have a hard time. So that's all I want to say, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.